Okay, cool. So it's going to be a little bit more of a lackluster Zoom than I usually do, but hopefully you guys just take away the message, and then I'll be back to my energetic self next week. But today's is going to be about anxiety and anticipating, which is something that I notice a lot of people do, and myself included. Everyone, if you have anxiety, it's like all you do is anticipate. It's like, if only I knew how not to anticipate. But I just want to give you a disclaimer before we get into this, that in no way am I trying to say that if you suffer from actual like generalized anxiety disorder, or you have an anxiety disorder of any kind, or it's truly just clinical anxiety, I'm not trying to tell you that I know how to change that completely or be the end all be all for not experiencing it anymore. So this is how this Zoom is going to be about handling anxious thoughts and how to stop the spiral cycle as it's happening. Of course, anxiety is a part of life, and for some, it's way worse than others. And when you have PCOS, a lot of the imbalanced hormones end up causing extra anxiety on top of it. So again, not saying it's all in our heads and that we can just will it away. I have generalized anxiety and panic disorder. I get it. But I hope to give you some tips that when it's at the point where it's like right before that tipping point, where hopefully we can redirect it. And it works most of the time. But again, not every time. So anxious thoughts lead to spiraling. And a lot of times those anxious thoughts come from anticipating how a situation will go, what somebody else will say, what they'll do, how similar to the past it'll be, how awful it'll be for the future. All of this anticipation, not based in fact, but based in fear, is what sends our brain to that direction. And when we don't have an explanation to give our brain for making it better, or seeming like it seems okay, or, just something tangible to give our brain to say it's going to be all right because X, Y, and Z. We don't have that tangible proof a lot of times. We can sit here and we can do, affirmations and talk about positive, beautiful things all we want. The brain's still going to be freaked out. So it's about knowing when you can, I want you guys to start becoming mindful of that tipping point. Because the more mindful you are of that tipping point, the more you can see it coming farther down the road, where you're able to stop and think about redirecting it, rather than getting hit like a ton of bricks and then you're like off to the races, and then once you're in a spiral, I mean, if any of you guys have experienced it, it's like drowning, it's like you can't get to the top of the surface of the water. It's just, and time is the only thing that there is. So I want you guys to think about how many times in a day you say the phrase, I feel like, because that's the number one way to start going in that direction, is I feel like every time blah, blah, blah happens, I blah, blah, blah. I feel like this is the case. It's a way to dispute fact and start anticipating what's to come. So let me think of an example. I feel like every time I try to do something, I just miss the mark. None of that is based in fact. All of that is based in I feel like. But if you don't want to feel like that, guess what? You don't have to, because you don't always miss the mark. It's just not what you want the outcome to be. And that disappointment gets masqueraded into I can't do this, or historically I have failed. Historically I have had this trigger. But every day, every minute, every experience you have is an individual experience. And if you remember the boxes video I did, and I talk about all the time, we end up putting them all in the box because it's our brain's way of giving us some kind of a pattern. It's our way of trying to give our brain some data so that we can have more control. But it's not more control, because if you guys experience anxiety, there's no more out of control feeling than when you're feeling anxious. So the only thing to do is before the adrenaline starts pumping. And that's that tipping point, is when your adrenals start sensing danger and it's like, oh, alert. And then anxiety comes. So if you can stop that response in its tracks with our words, with our thoughts, which I'm going to explain today, and you don't release that adrenaline, you're not going to have to deal with that heart pounding, I feel like imminent danger is everywhere kind of feeling. which is really difficult to turn off once the hormones have kicked in. So remember, be mindful of I feel like, excuse me, and try to make it more so about fact. So if the thing is, I feel like every time I try to do something, I miss the mark, change it to be, I feel like I really need to get better at blank. And that goes back to the verbiage video I was saying. It doesn't mean you have to pretend that these feelings don't exist. It doesn't mean you have to be delusional and be like, life is rainbows. Like you can still be harping on what you want to improve, which is basically the point of feeling, I feel like I always miss the mark. I feel like I want to get better at, I don't even know what missing the mark is because I made this up, but like I want to get better at not missing the mark. You know what I mean? Like changing that tone, even if you already say, I feel like I always miss the mark, you can always go back and just stop yourself and be like, I really want to get better at that. Like you don't even have to be instinctive about it. You can just start feeding your brain a correction and say, I really have to get better at blank. When that happens, then you want to go into problem solving mode, which if it's a problem we can't solve, one, that's the number one way you can see that that's anxiety. Because if it's extreme worry about a problem you have no control over right now, your brain is firing off fear because it's like, oh my God, anticipation. This could happen. This could happen. If I'm not on top of everything, all of this will happen. But we're not fortune tellers. So the only thing we can do in that moment is either think about exactly what's bothering us and pick one step to start working towards in that direction. It feeds our brain the information we need. It feeds our brain the thought of, I'm getting past this. I'm getting things done. I'm more efficient. The more you can make your brain see how efficient you are, it stops triggering that anxiety response. Again, not if you have generalized anxiety, but it should stop triggering that anxiety response because you have tangible steps in front of you. It's not like you have no way out and all you can do is worry, because that's when the feelings start compounding. That's when the adrenaline starts pumping because your body's like, what do I do? If you don't know what to do, you don't know what to do. And that happens all the time. I know that I used to get annoyed by this with my mentor, my therapist, but whenever I say to some people that, well, it's all figure outable, we'll figure it out, I can see the annoyance coming from them, and I get it because I've been there, because they're like, what do you mean? Everything's going wrong. I need to figure this out now. I don't have forever to just let things work out. But that's the brain's way of catastrophe. I can never say this word. Catastrophizing. I don't know. I'm still butchering it, but you get what I'm saying. It's our brain's way, again, anticipating the worst. I'll run out of time. I can't figure it out and I'm going to be screwed. I'm going to try and figure it out and I won't be able to. These are all the brains, the anxiety brain kicking in. But again, is any of that fact? None of it's fact. The fact is, while it is time sensitive to get it figured out, right this second, nobody is waiting on the other side of a phone waiting for an answer or a decision. So it doesn't mean that, well, everything's figure outable means eventually someday. It just means not right this second, because the worst time to figure anything out is when you're upset. Our brains aren't meant to really be firing off in different departments at all times. It's, to be worried about, to be multitasking emotionally is not going to end up working out well, because you feel you don't have any control over one specific area. You have no momentum, I should say, rather than control in one specific problem. So everything feels overwhelming because we're trying to solve everything right that second, or maybe the first time we're hearing something. And it's just not possible. If anybody in here was the kind of person who could hear something once and completely change and adopt it, oh my God, you guys would be like, you'd be a millionaire, because there's just nobody can do that. That's not even genius level. I don't know what that is. Genie? Like, I don't know who can just figure things out right away or know how to do everything the first time you hear it. It takes time. So whenever that anxiety brain is kicking in, feeding it what we do know or what we can do or what we can control right in this second, not trying to tell our brains, oh, it'll get solved. Because yeah, I get it. That's scary. Because like, I actually have to do shit to figure this out. But if we're just saying to ourselves, right this second's not the ideal time to figure it out, that gives us a chance to have a breather. And then we can figure out what steps there possibly are to take. So clearing that space is really important. So remember, realize your triggers, your triggering thoughts. The I feel like is usually the number one. And it's a general just statement that is not fact. And it's something that puts you in a bad headspace. Also, I want to talk about creating stories in anticipation. We all do this, all of us. And it's out of worry. It's out of fear. It's out of, we think, preparedness. But at the end of the day, it's mostly just because we need to feel like we're thinking on it. We're working on it. We're working towards it. We're getting proactive. We're imagining every scenario possible so that we're prepared. But just like the people, I think I used this example like 4 times today, just like the people who leave only bad reviews and never good reviews. And I've done that myself. Like, please, something pisses me off or something comes to me broken. I'm like white chicks. I'm like, I'm going to write a letter. Like, I get so upset. But if I had this exceptional experience, I'll be like, I got to write a review for them. And then I'll be honest, it slips my mind a lot of times. So when we're upset and we're anticipating scenarios, we're not anticipating the best scenario. We're anticipating the worst case scenario. The scenario we're terrified about is what we're considering, but we think that's preparedness. It's not preparedness. How many times have you dreaded a meeting with someone, prepared yourself by dreading it for days, and then you go in there in front of that person in that meeting and you really like blank, like you can't even talk. You're like, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's because you're terrified. It doesn't mean that you're prepared. It just means you've been worried about it for days. And knowing that distinction between worry and preparedness is how we stop anticipating. So how I do this is, well, before I tell you how I do this, another way I see anticipation a lot that harms us is being afraid to talk or say what we want to say out of anticipation of how it will be received by somebody else. Or will, like I mentioned this in the last video, will it make it worse? Should I have even opened my mouth in the first place? Is it worth it to even talk about? All of these things, will they freak out at me? Oh, in the past, I know how they're going to be. They're not even going to listen to me. I can't even tell you how many times I hear this in relationships in particular, is somebody will have a problem and I'll recommend they communicate in a way they never have with their partner. But this person already knows how their partner is going to react. And they base it on history, on past fights, on a lot of it on the fear of the worst case, on the fear of what their worst freak out moment would be. Will they be devastated? Will they hate me? That's what anticipation is. And it's all anxiety. All of it's anxiety. Because anxiety is the presence of fear presenting as fact. And there's no more textbook example of that than to anticipate how a conversation will go before even entering it. So definitely keep these comments coming. I love when you guys send me comments. That's what I need to remember to do. I have to calm first, then organize my thoughts. Yes, that's an awesome point to make, is first, and it's not even, if you go into it thinking I have to calm myself down, you might get annoyed with yourself because it's not going to happen right away. But if you go into it thinking, okay, what's stressing me? And you list it, that in itself tends to calm you down, because instead of it being your brain feels full of the stuff that's freaking you out, it's 6 things written down on a piece of paper. And then when you see it in front of you, you say, okay, so none of this is like life or death by tomorrow. None of this is, and it starts to become rationalized, and then your brain catches up with the emotions. So definitely, if calming yourself down, it doesn't work, which I got so many lists around this joint, let me tell you. But, then list it out. List the things that are stressing you out on a piece of paper. And then realize when you're creating stories. So if someone's never said the exact thing that you're saying, like if you're like, well, I tried telling them this and they were like, blah, blah, blah. Okay, that has nothing to do with this situation. Did they say that about this situation? And they're like, no, but I know they're going to say it again. Like, they're going to think it about this time too. That's a story that we're creating. We're creating the story that they forever feel that way. that people's emotions don't change from day to day, that maybe the person you were talking to had an off day that day, or maybe they want to tell you how they're feeling. I don't know. But in any way, if you use the past as a means of measure for the future, that in a way is anticipating, because there's no way to know how that story is going to go until it plays out. But scary. I get that. Because especially if you had a bad time the last time it happened, and that's why you're carrying it into this situation, it's scary because you don't want to relive that awful past situation again. But you got to get comfy with the concept that now that that all of you guys are growing, every situation you're going into, it may not be exactly the same ever again. Because whereas before your headspace was completely somewhere else, maybe you can handle more than you think now. And the only way that you would know that, the only way you would know what an impact you can make on this version of that story is by living it. And anticipating it and worry just kills the vibe. It does nothing. It doesn't affect what actually is going to happen this time. It doesn't take away what happened in the past. And it clouds what you feel you have a right to talk about. So don't go into any situation anticipating the worst, because if you go into it thinking, I don't know what could happen, but I can handle it, it's still acknowledging the idea that it might not go great, but it's very much acknowledging the concept that whatever does happen, you got it. And that is going to make you feel a lot more prepared than saying they're going to scream at me and this is going to happen because it happened in the past. You're not going to feel prepared in that scenario. Be secure in reality versus catastrophe, because catastrophe is just panic disorder. So like every time I get in an elevator thinking I'm going to be stuck in there for hours, like crazy, crazy stuff. Sometimes you can't help those thoughts from coming in. You can't help, and they're intrusive thoughts. You can't know when they're going to sneak in. You can't feel bad about yourself or beat yourself up for having them. You just got to redirect. And you just have to, what did I write here? Oh, sometimes all we can control is getting shit done and problem solving, even if it's not the answer to what we need. So if you're in the middle of catastrophizing, can never say it, and you know that, you're imagining the absolute worst possibility, don't try to deny those feelings. Just say to yourself, I'm having these feelings because I'm scared of this situation, but whatever happens, I can handle it. Try it. It's a way to redirect the feelings from getting to that tipping point. What else did I write here? Oh, don't proclaim anxious thoughts. I wrote here in my notes, don't say anxiety bullshit as fact, because it's true. Don't allow it to become fact. Don't allow those intrusive thoughts to become previews of what's to come. That just speaks to my other point. But I wanted to mention that is, if you're so convinced that something that's never happened is going to happen the way it is, I want you to start telling people you're psychic. I guarantee you none of you guys are going to tell people you're psychic, right? Because you're like, that's crazy. I'm not a psychic. I don't know. Maybe you are. I believe in it. But I'm just saying, like, to know what every situation is going to be would mean that you're psychic. So if you're not comfortable proclaiming that and telling people that you are, stop making yourself suffer by telling yourself that you're a psychic and you know exactly how situations are going to go. Because you're probably excluding yourself from a lot of great outcomes that way. Let's see here. I wrote a really good point here. Sometimes people take comfort, oddly, in their anxious thoughts and anticipating. I mentioned this before. It makes you feel like you're more on the ball. But don't get sucked into that. Don't get sucked into the, I don't want to be numb though, or this is part of my personality. Of course, it could be a great part of your personality to be thoughtful, to be prepared. But if you're telling yourself that those two things are synonymous with anxiety, you are telling yourself a story to comfort yourself, because you shouldn't feel empowered by terror. You shouldn't be empowered by absolute fear of everything falling apart at any given second. And you also shouldn't ignore that. You should journal about it. I keep saying journal. Everyone's like, I want to write. I don't want to think those feelings. And I get it. Journaling, sometimes it's like the hardest part is the first sentence. Like, how do I even start this? How do I start this dumpster fire of a journal entry that I'm going to put in here? And if you need to, text me about it. I'll help kick it off for you, but put effort into journaling. Trust me when I tell you, you're going to learn about yourself a lot more. You're going to further the things that we talk about a lot more on your own terms. You'll be able to start self-analyzing and see patterns from day to day that maybe you didn't recognize before, but as you skim through your journal, you see, or weight loss, once you eventually lose weight, right? The results are, the proof is in the pudding. Measurements, pictures, the scale. When you make mentality strides, I don't know why I said it like that. I was like, mentality strides. But when you make strides with your mentality, it is far harder to gauge. It's far harder to measure long-term because it's not going to be just like with weight loss. You're not going to wake up one day and be 40 pounds down. You're going to be 2 pounds down, 5 pounds down, little by little by little until you get there. With mentality, every day is not going to be a great day. Every day is not going to be a powerful, I'm doing it, I'm getting it done kind of day. Hell, not every hour is going to be that way. It is not a smooth ride the whole way through. And it doesn't mean that you're not learning or you're not doing well or anything like that, or you're stuck here. It means that it's part of life, is that things happen every day where you're up here, you're down here, you're up here, you're down here. That's everybody else. Sometimes when we have a lot going on, we're like everywhere, So some days you're going to be a lot more scattered. It's going to be a lot harder to see that light at the end of the tunnel. You might wake up on a Monday, be flying high, having a great day, amazed, excited for the future. And then you wake up Tuesday and everything's shit. And you might be like, what's wrong with me that I'm feeling this? There must be something wrong, or I'm not getting it. I'm not getting better. When you journal, you can then flip through those days. So I don't want you to, again, don't be the reviewer. Don't only do journal entries on bad days. When you do them consistently, you have something to go back to and see on those good days and say, okay, so if this is how I was feeling 3 days ago, then I can sense that it's going to have my highs and my lows. Today is a day I got to get through, and I'll have more days like this again. It's a way for you to continue to show yourself the growth, because it's not going to be linear. It's all over the place, and we don't want to be beating ourselves up till we get to that 40-pound down mark, just like we don't want to be beating ourselves up until we become this Zen person who's never worried, which never happens. I don't care. I don't believe anybody who's like, I never worry. Come on, you're human. If you don't worry, then you must have a very pampered life. But it's all about redirecting that. It's about, I wrote here, you must learn to self-coach. I use the term, you give someone a fish, they eat for a meal. You teach them how to fish, they eat for the rest of their life. And, in the beginning, I'm helping you guys. I'm teaching you these different methods, these ways of thinking, the ways to change your verbiage. And I'm not saying I'm like, your time has come, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm just saying that as we learn this, try to find opportunities to self-coach yourself as if you and I were talking. And then be proud of that when you get through it. When you stop a spiral, that's a win. Just like a pound off on the scale. That's even more of a win than a pound off on the scale. One, because of physically it's going to affect your hormones and help you, be a lot more balanced. But two, your peace, your well-being, the people around you are going to experience a better version of you, like all of this stuff. So those are wins. Just recognizing on your own that you're about to go towards spiral and then redirecting it. Oh my God, the first time that happens to one of you guys, you best text me because I want to celebrate with you. That's amazing. So this one's going to be a short one because I'm having trouble breathing, but I'm going to post a recording tonight before I go to bed. And then I just want you guys to tell me what you took away from this. If it was just more of a confirmation of things we've gone over, if it's groundbreaking, if you hated it, I don't care. I want to know. I love having conversations about this, but through text tonight, definitely not through talking. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope that this helped you. I'm sorry that it's a little bit shorter, but I felt that this week was kind of an emotional week for a lot of you guys. So sometimes we just need that little recap, that little regrouping on a Monday, even if we've gone over this already. to power through for the week ahead. So if there's anything I can do to help you guys beyond this, definitely let me know, and enjoy the rest of your nights. Okay? Bye.